My stepmom didn't lower her voice. She stood in the center of my graduation party, lifted her glass, and announced, "We're moving without you." No hesitation, no shame, just a public cut so sharp the whole backyard fell silent. Then she added, "This house is too good for someone like you," and the laughter that followed burned hotter than the summer air. I didn't cry or plead. I just looked at her and said, "Have a safe move," because what she didn't know was simple. I'd bought the house last month, and the next morning eviction notices would arrive. Before I go on, tell me, where are you listening from? I grew up in a house where silence was the safest language. My dad remarried when I was 12, and from the moment my stepmom stepped through the doorway, the air in our home shifted. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed everything she touched was hers by default, including him, the house, and eventually the narrative of who I was allowed to be. I learned early that any space I occupied had to be justified. If I sat in the living room too long, she'd accidentally vacuum around my feet. If I cooked dinner, she'd adjust the seasoning the second I stepped away, as if erasing my contribution. None of it was loud, but all of it was deliberate. Dad never confronted it. He just drifted into her gravity, leaving me to orbit on the edges. The house became her stage. Every holiday, every gathering, every forced smile family photo revolved around her need to be admired. The walls were filled with curated memories that never included me: graduations of her kids, vacations. I wasn't invited to birthday parties I watched from the staircase. But I stayed. I studied. I worked part-time after school. And little by little, I built a quiet resilience no one ever noticed. The only person who truly saw me was my grandma. She lived across town in a tiny place that always smelled like warm apples and lavender detergent. She kept a small table by the window for the two of us, one cup for her tea, one for mine. Whenever the house felt too heavy, I'd escape there and she'd remind me, "You don't need to shout to be powerful, Maya." Some storms form in silence. I carried those words with me through high school, through the late nights, studying at the kitchen table while everyone else slept through the subtle ways my stepmom tried to shrink me. She hated when I succeeded. It meant her version of me didn't stick. So when my graduation finally arrived, Grandma promised she'd sit in the front row no matter what. My stepmom dismissed it with a shrug, saying the day was more about the family than the diploma. But I didn't care. I had earned that moment. The party afterward was her idea. She decorated the backyard in colors she liked, invited people I barely knew, and positioned herself so photographers would catch her in the center of every shot. I helped set up the tables even though no one thanked me. I'd grown used to being the invisible pair of hands behind everything. Still, part of me hoped things would be different that day. Maybe Dad would look at me the way he used to, or my step-siblings would say something genuine for once. I hoped my stepmom might put the performance aside long enough to let me feel like I belonged. But standing there surrounded by laughter that wasn't meant for me in the house that never felt like mine, I felt the shift before she even opened her mouth. Something was building, something cold, something carefully prepared, and deep down I knew this celebration wasn't for me. It was the stage for my humiliation. The moment my stepmom tapped her spoon against her glass, the backyard shifted. The chatter softened, the music dipped, and every face turned toward her like she was the bride at my graduation instead of me. She loved that being the center, being the sun everyone revolved around. I already felt my stomach tighten the way it always did right before she struck. She smiled wide, the kind that never reached her eyes, and said, "Well, since today is all about new beginnings, I think it's the perfect time to share ours." Her voice stretched across the yard, smooth and rehearsed. People leaned in, expecting something sentimental, maybe a toast to my future. I wasn't expecting anything for myself, but I also wasn't expecting the blow. "We're moving," she said brightly. "But not all of us." A few guests chuckled, politely confused. She let the silence hang just long enough to sharpen it. "We're moving without you, Maya." The words hit like a cold wave. Conversations halted. My dad blinked hard, like he'd practiced this moment in his head, but wasn't ready for it out loud. My step-siblings stiffened beside the dessert table. And the guests' people who knew me only through her curated lens turned to see how I'd take it. She didn't stop there. "This house," she said, sweeping her manicured hand around like she owned the oxygen, "is too good for someone like you." This time the laughter wasn't polite. It was real thin, sharp cutting. A few people whispered behind their palms. Someone near the grill murmured, "Did she really just say that?" But no one stepped in. Not my dad, not my step-siblings. Not a single person who had eaten the food I'd spent all morning helping prepare. Heat rose behind my eyes. Not from embarrassment. Humiliation was an old familiar coat by then, but from clarity. The kind that only arrives when someone finally says the quiet part out loud. I looked at my dad, searching his face for a flicker of the man who used to braid my hair when I was little. Instead, he stared at the deck boards like the truth had been nailed there. Her kids laughed the loudest. One of them nudged the other and joked about finally getting their space back. It stung not because of their words, but because I realized they had rehearsed this too. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was planned, coordinated, executed in front of witnesses so they could all pretend it was just a joke. A slow, heavy certainty settled in my chest. This wasn't the first time they'd pushed me out, but it was the first time they wanted an audience. And yet, even in that moment, I didn't give them what they wanted. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I didn't beg them to reconsider. I watched them laugh, and something inside me realigned, a quiet click like a lock turning. Because that speech, that humiliating little performance, told me everything I needed to know. They thought they had all the power. They thought I would always stay small. They thought I didn't have options, and they had no idea what I had already done. That was the moment, right there under the string lights and fake applause, when the story stopped being about their cruelty and started being about my choice. When the party finally thinned out, I slipped inside the house they claimed was too good for someone like me. Their laughter still floated in through the open door, but inside everything was still. The kind of stillness that feels like a held breath. I leaned against the kitchen counter, letting the cool surface ground me. For a moment, I let the weight of it all settle, every dismissal, every correction, every time they'd made me feel like I was temporary. Through the window, I could see my stepmom standing with her friends reenacting her announcement with exaggerated hand gestures. They burst into laughter again. My chest tightened, but not with hurt this time, with certainty. That small click I'd felt earlier had become something steady, like a quiet engine warming. I went upstairs to my room, the one space in the house she never bothered to decorate because she assumed I wouldn't stay long. A single lamp lit the corner, casting a warm circle on the desk where I'd spent months planning my future. On top of it sat a file folder, not a sentimental scrapbook, not a graduation card, just documents, real estate contracts, payment confirmations. The proof that I had already stepped into adulthood on my own terms. I sat down and reopened the folder, running my fingers over the papers. The deed with my name, the transfer confirmations, the notice templates I'd researched late at night while everyone else slept. I hadn't planned to use them this soon, certainly not like this, but cruelty has a way of accelerating things. Buying the house hadn't been a revenge plan. It had been survival. I'd saved for years, worked through college, and seized an opportunity when the previous owner needed a quick sale. I never told my family because I didn't want their opinions or their sabotage, and now that silence, my lifelong defense, had become my shield. A soft knock came at my door. My dad's voice followed, low and hesitant. "Maya, are you okay?" I stared at the knob. He didn't sound sorry. He sounded worried about how he looked, how the scene might reach the neighbors, how his wife might spin this later. I couldn't give him comfort he hadn't earned. "I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice even. "You should enjoy the rest of the night." There was a long pause. Then his footsteps retreated down the hall. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That was the last moment I felt any doubt. I gathered the documents and placed them neatly into a single envelope. Tomorrow would be simple, legal, clean. No yelling, no accusations, just boundaries enforced the way adults enforce them, through action, not reaction. Before leaving the room, I took one last look around. Every corner carried a memory of being overlooked, dismissed, or made small. But none of that mattered anymore. Not after tonight. I walked downstairs, slipped past the crowd unnoticed, and stepped into the quiet air outside. Tomorrow they would receive the notices. Tomorrow the house would no longer be hers. The next morning felt unnaturally bright, the kind of sunlight that made everything look cleaner than it really was. I woke up before my alarm, my thoughts already sharp and steady. Today wasn't about revenge, it was about truth, about boundaries, about showing them quietly, legally, irrefutably, that the power they believed they had over me never actually existed. I dressed, simply pulled my hair back, and slipped the prepared documents into a slim envelope. Outside, the street was calm. A few early joggers passed by. Sprinklers flicked across lawns. Nothing about the scene hinted that inside this house an era was ending. At 8:07 a.m., a car pulled up in front of the driveway. The process server stepped out, checked the address, and greeted me with a nod. "Morning," he said. "You ready?" I exhaled slowly. "Yes. Thank you." He handed me a copy of the notices for verification. Everything was in order, clean, lawful, straightforward. A simple statement of ownership and the required 30-day timeline. No malice. No dramatics. Just the truth. "Okay," he said, "let's begin." We walked toward the porch. Just as he reached for the doorbell, the front door swung open. My stepmom stood there in a robe, her hair in rollers, a mug in hand. She looked annoyed to see anyone on her doorstep so early, then confused when she saw the envelope in the server's hand. "Can I help you?" she asked, shifting her weight like she was preparing to dismiss a sales pitch. "Yes, ma'am," he replied evenly. "These are for you." She blinked, took the envelope, glanced at the heading, and froze. "What? What is this?" she demanded, but the server had already stepped back. "You've been served." He nodded once to me and walked toward his car. Professional, efficient, detached. She tore the envelope open right there on the porch. Her eyes skimmed a few lines before widening. Her mouth fell open. She looked up at me, confused at first, then horrified. "This is a joke," she said. "Tell me this is a joke." "It's not," I said quietly. My dad appeared behind her, squinting against the sunlight. "What's going on?" She shoved the papers into his chest. "Read this." "Just read it." He scanned the page, the lines forming slowly in his expression. Uncertainty, shock, disbelief. "Eviction," he murmured. "Whose name?" "Who?" He stopped. Looked at me. Really looked. "Maya," he said softly. "Why is your name on the deed?" I held his gaze. "Because I bought the house last month." The words dropped between us like a stone into still water. Ripples spread instantly. My stepmom's face twisted. "You bought no. No. You didn't. You can't. This is my house." "It hasn't been," I said gently, "for several weeks." Her eyes flashed. "You're lying. You're trying to embarrass me after last night, aren't you? This is some pathetic retaliation. If it were revenge, I said I would have told the entire party last night. But I didn't, because this has nothing to do with humiliation. I purchased the house legally, quietly, months before you announced your move." She shook her head violently. "No. No. You don't have that kind of money. You don't have the connections. You don't have control." I finished for her. "You're right. I don't need your approval anymore." My step-siblings rushed out onto the porch, hair messy, eyes puffy with sleep. "Mom, what's going on?" "Tell them," she snapped at me. "Tell them what you're doing. Tell them you're kicking us out of our home." "It was never your home," I said. "It was owned by someone who decided to sell quickly, and I made the offer first. You didn't check the property records, did you?" Her daughter stepped forward. "You can't just evict us. We have lives, things to pack, commitments. That's why the notice gives you 30 days, I replied. "Everything is by the book." My dad stared at the papers again, his voice barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me?" A small ache tugged at my chest, but only for a second. "Would it have mattered?" I asked. "Would you have listened, or would you have let her talk over me like always?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. No answer. Just guilt settling in the lines of his face. Stepmom switched tactics instantly, her voice softening, almost shaking. "We can talk about this. We can work something out. This doesn't have to happen. It already has, I said. And it's not a punishment, it's a boundary. You told everyone yesterday that the house was too good for someone like me. So now it's yours to leave. Her mask cracked. The fake warmth evaporated. You ungrateful little, my dad cut her off sharply. Stop! His voice wasn't loud, but it was the first time in years I'd heard it carry authority. He turned to me. Is this really your decision? Yes, I said, and it's final. The weight of the silence that followed was unlike anything I'd felt before. It wasn't suffocating. It wasn't humiliating. It was steady, strong. Mine. My stepmom let out a bitter laugh. So, you think you've won now? You think this makes you powerful? No, I said. I think it makes me responsible. For my future. For my peace. For choosing a life where I'm not constantly belittled. She shook from head to toe, anger and panic colliding. You can't do this to us. I'm not doing anything to you, I replied. I'm doing something for myself. Dad tried to speak again, but the words collapsed before they formed. He looked at the house, then back at me. I could see regret in his eyes, too little too late. My step-siblings stood in a huddle, whispering frantically. Someone said, "What are we going to do now?" Another muttered, "She can't be serious." But they all knew I was. When they finally began gathering their things, the house no longer echoed with cruelty. Instead, it felt lighter, as if years of tension were lifting from the walls. As they packed hurriedly, I stood in the doorway watching, not with triumph, not with vengeance, with clarity. This was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I didn't have to keep shrinking to fit inside someone else's story. And as their bags piled into the cars, their voices trembling with disbelief, I realized something. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding the deed. When the last car pulled away, the street fell quiet in a way I'd never heard before. No shouting, no footsteps thudding up the stairs, no whispers about where I did or didn't belong, just stillness clean and new. I stepped back inside, letting the door close softly behind me. For the first time, the house didn't feel hostile. It felt mine. Later that afternoon, Grandma called. She'd heard nothing about the scene, only that I sounded lighter than usual. You finally chose yourself, she said. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I felt my throat tighten, but in a good way. In the days that followed, Dad reached out a few times, short messages, hesitant. I didn't ignore him, but I didn't rush to answer either. Healing wasn't a door I could fling open overnight. I painted the living room, planted fresh flowers by the porch, and rearranged the furniture until the space felt like a beginning instead of a battleground. Standing in the doorway a week later, I looked around the house, quiet, sunlit, finally at peace, and realized something simple silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the boundary that saves you. This place, once a reminder of everything I lacked, had become proof of everything I could build on my own terms. If you've ever been pushed aside or underestimated, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if this journey resonated with you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter.